Hello and welcome to a very special video show of That Shooting Show. My name's Steve Anderson. I am, as always, your humble host. And today we are joined by a very good friend of mine, Team Beretta shooter, Ben Hart. How's it going, Ben?
Morning, Steve. I'm doing good. I didn't realize this was a special video edition. That's kind of fun.
Well, with you, it's always special.
Yeah, that's true.
And with video, it's even more special. You got the Beretta logo, you got the Stig helmet. It's really, really nice. Really nice. And I want to thank you again for helping my 80-year-old mother get unhacked or unfished or unspoofed. You guys had the best time.
The best time. We had the best time. That was boy, that was more challenging than I expected, but I'm glad we got it sorted.
You know what's funny is right after that happened, I had a guy reschedule an insider call because he was dealing with the exact same thing. He goes, I'm fighting some weird thing about Amazon gift cards and I don't even know what to do. And I'm like, well, if you're an 80-year-old woman, that could be a problem, but not if you're Ben Hart from Team Beretta.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. I was glad to help.
Well, thank you very much. And it meant so much to me to be able to reach out to you because I was on the road. I can't help her anyway. I figured it'd be small potatoes for you. So thanks again. So for those that aren't familiar with your fame and glory, give us a bit of background on Ben Hart, the Team Beretta shooter.
Yeah, so I started shooting competitively in about 2015. I had taken a few concealed carry classes because I'd done some work for a gun shop. He was a financial planner with a gun shop side on the gig. Like he needed to burn some money for taxes or something. I don't know, because you never make money with a gun shop, right? But we did some trade out and we traded a pistol for some work, and I took a couple of concealed carry classes and did a whole bunch of defensive training, and they kept trying to get me to come and do competition, but I was doing autocross and basketball and baseball and golf. I was doing 10 other competitive things. And then I finally took a class from Keith Garcia, a 3-gun class, and loved the competition aspect of it, and had taken several from Mike Seeklander and loved the competition aspect of it. And so I went and shot an IDPA classifier match, right, which back then was different than the 5x5 they shoot today, but classified, and loved the competition aspect of it. And within short order had sold my car, had sold my golf clubs or put them in the closet, hung up the cleats, all of that other stuff, and started shooting more. And then really was a decent shooter, probably a B class, IDPA expert. And I don't remember which class it was. It might have been a Latham class when a couple of light bulbs went off, and I thought, oh, like I could really love this. And then I got pretty serious. I guess that was about 2017 or 2018. So I started pretty heavily on the IDPA side. I shoot them both now, back and forth and back and forth. Locally here, we have a 3 or 4 to 1 IDPA to USPSA in favor of IDPA match schedule, so I could shoot whatever I want. But I had a great club in Sacramento, and people are surprised when they hear that California has such a strong shooting community. But we literally, our locals, our monthly IDPA local was 110 shooters, like super good community. In USPSA, we had 3 clubs and doing 80 or 90 per club per month, like a ton of shooting in California. And so I'm really lucky to be here in Texas where it's similar, right? We've got a great club, but
so one thing about California is there's this Instagram guy called Competition Shooting Analytics or something like that.
Yeah.
And he did a study, and his study showed that California is far and away, not even close to other states, dominating USPSA competition, which I found fascinating.
Yeah, and people do. And I was talking to a guy at the match on Sunday, and he was worried about flying into California with his guns. I'm like, dude, like it's the most active shooting community in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I've came to Texas, and then as far as the Beretta thing goes, a couple of years ago, I think it was just before COVID hit, Beretta had put out a little announcement with IDPA saying, hey, we're looking to sponsor an IDPA shooter. Contact whoever at IDPA if you're interested. And of course, I threw my name in the hat. And then COVID hit, and no shooting happened. And then at single stack nationals, or maybe it was low cap, whatever they called it, 2 years ago this May, I was in Talladega, and Beretta was a title sponsor, and they had their big trailer with all their guns and everybody there. And JJ was there shooting production, and Jessica was there shooting limited 10, must have been limited 10 because it was low cap. And so I kind of talked to the team manager, the people at the booth, and then that night at dinner, I was sitting at the bar. And remember, this was COVID, and there was like 3 people working. And it was insanely crazy because you had 500 people there for a match, and it was the only pizza restaurant for 50 miles, right? And it was just crazy. And I was sitting at the bar having a old fashioned probably, and some guy walks up next to me. He says, "Hey, you mind if we kind of squeeze in here?" And his name was Brian Buzzy, and I didn't know at the time, but he was the Beretta shotgun captain or shotgun team manager or something. And we kind of hit it off and shot the bull a little bit and had a couple of drinks. And then the rest of the Beretta team showed up. And that's when I met the team manager, Nicola, who's a good friend now, and no longer the team manager, but he and I still talk regularly, and kind of got to know everybody. And I really just think that bourbon and beer and pizza and just a real great environment is the reason that I was even offered a slot. Obviously, at the time, I was a decent IDPA shooter. I'm a much better IDPA shooter today. But at the time, I wasn't a marquee name in IDPA. I was just a nice guy at the right place. You know what I mean? And kind of took initiative and said, well, if they're here and I want a sponsorship, I should go talk to them. And it's worked out really well. They have been awesome, super supportive. Shooting with a teammate, JJ, who is clearly one of the best in the world, and having the support of a major manufacturer, and getting to wear the logo and the jersey. Like, how cool is that? Right? I mean, it's awesome. So today, right? Today I'd push a lot harder. I'm a much better shooter. I've trained with you a number of times. And today I take it pretty seriously.
So how much do you get to interact with JJ on the team?
When we shoot a match together, like we've got Dragons Cup that I'm hoping to shoot next month, or I guess it's almost April. So yeah, end of April. When we shoot a match together, we'll kind of talk and have a coffee and talk about shooting and that kind of stuff. And we do team calls and team, stuff. And then when we go to the big shows, shot or whatever, we're all kind of together. But I have never actually had a chance to train or practice with JJ. And that's actually something that I would love to do, is have a couple of practice sessions with him and just watch how he approaches practice, right? Because that's more about what it is for me today is how do I approach practice? How do I really chase that next 0.5%, right?
Well, I'll tell you what, since you're obviously not very well connected to JJ, I'll see if I can get a hold of him through my channels.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
See if I can get him to return your calls. Now, because you have done so many other sports, did you find a mental game advantage or disadvantage coming into shooting from autocross and team sports and things like that? Like, were there similarities and were there differences?
Autocross is very similar because autocross is just you in the car. There's no team component to it. And it is different every time you pull up. Every whatever Saturday we were going, it's a different setup. And we had you have 4 chances to do one course, right? And so you had to walk it and learn it and visualize it. So that was really similar. Baseball, basketball were team, but looking back, my gosh, if I would have had the mental tools and the practice style tools, which boils down to the mental game, when I was 20, brother, I'd be a retired NBA player. Like, it was just, I wish I would have had those tools,
Well, so that was my question, right? So you obviously figured out you were probably what we would call unconscious competent, which means you could perform at a pretty high level and maybe didn't understand exactly how you were doing it. Is that
no clue how I was doing it? No clue.
And then so you may have reached a point where pressure caused that sort of unconscious competent, as we call it, to sort of begin to crumble, because now we're doing fine, but here's a pressure that we weren't ready for or didn't expect, and we may not know what to do.
Oh yeah, I have a specific story about that. I was going to UNR, University of Nevada, Reno, and I was playing a lot of basketball, but I didn't play in high school. I wasn't anything before college, but then I got into college and I was playing a lot of ball. And I was playing with a lot of the guys that were on the team in the off season, or when they weren't practicing, they would come to the gym, and I was playing with all those guys, and I was running with all those guys. Like, I was at that level. And so they had walk-on tryouts. And I remember there was this guy named Ty who the guy was so good. Anyway, but they had walk-on tryouts, and I got down there and I overtried and I gassed, and it was like I had concrete shoes, like absolutely overtried. If I'd have just rolled in there and played like I play, I probably would have been a lot better. But anyway, one of the things I kind of look back on, and I love my basketball days, but I definitely missed the mental component. And I'm glad to have found it now, because I'm coming up on 50. I'm 49 this year. And like, I'm running with guys that are 20, 22, right? Obviously fitness is a big part of it. You mentioned in your podcast, like, the difference between being fit or fat. Like, take the fit side, right? It's not going to be a disadvantage ever to be more fit. So I work on that part, but the mental part of it doesn't matter. I think I have an advantage over a 20-year-old who knows everything, right?
Well, there's no question. And let's just tell everybody who might be new to this, overtrying is always caused by a lack of confidence or a fear that your normal performance won't be good enough for the result that you desire.
Right.
When you're just hanging out with those guys playing basketball at the gym, you don't have a care in the world, so it's easy, right? And then the pressure of a walk-on audition sounds like it causes you to go, okay, I got to really give my best to impress these guys.
Yep.
It's really, and so understanding that can prevent us from doing that when we can spot it happening. And that brings me to my next point. I love telling people this because you attended one of the first mental managements that I did, and you were the skeptic.
Totally.
You reminded me of when I used to play guitar in bands. You could see all the other guitar players at the back of the bar with their arms crossed, and you were that guy. You were like, you better play something that impresses me or I'm out of here. And I remember looking at you and going, I tried not to ignore the other people, but I'm like, I'm going to win this guy over if it's the last thing I do. Right. And that was a great opportunity for me to really examine what I believe and how I believed it could help you. Because I think you told me, in fact, I know you did, Richmond, California. You said, look, I've been pretty good at some other stuff and I'm pretty good at this. What do I need to know? So how did you go from skeptic to believer in that space of about 6 hours?
I don't know if I've ever told you this specifically about that day, but I believe that it was your first mental management, your first in-person mental management.
Very close to it. Yeah. Maybe the first. Yeah.
And so I was like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's never done this. He can't do this. Like, I was a total skeptic. And then add on top of that, I was a skeptic of the because you'd been talking about it a little bit, right? Of the journaling and of the imprints and of all of this stuff. I was like, all right, let's see what it is, right? I've read the books, I've done all the things, like, and number one is you absolutely had the material, like you had it down. Like, I don't know how many times you practiced that presentation, but you hit your marks. You had the right slides at the right time. We hit the 6 hours. We weren't terribly over. We definitely weren't under. Like, you absolutely delivered on what you had promised as far as a functional event. And then the content, well, you can give Lanny the credit for the content. Like, the guy knows what he's talking about, and all you had to do was change a couple of words to make it work for your delivery. So obviously I'm a huge proponent of the mental game, and there's some guys that approach it slightly differently, but Lanny has codified it, and you have delivered it to the practical shooting community, and it works. Wow, what's to argue with?
Well, so what makes me unique as opposed to Lanny is Lanny can say, do these things to get this result. I can go back and tell you stories from my career where I didn't do those things and had a catastrophic failure, and everybody can relate to it, right? Everybody's changed their plan at the last minute, Everybody has gone out and rushed, tried and hurried. Everybody has made every mistake that is the antithesis of mental management. So they can go back in their past career, just like you can look back at your basketball career and go, oh, I overtried.
Yeah.
You
Well,
made
well,
it
clearly,
all the time.
yeah, clearly that's what you've done is you've taken all of your experience, you've taken all of your things that you imagined and you created, which are what do you always say, 90% of it, whatever, like it was this close. And then all of the mental management stuff just clicked right in. And so like you were able to nail it immediately.
So the thing so I started in the sport with the singular goal of making grandmaster. I didn't care what happened the day after that. And I don't make any apologies for that. That's what I want. Right. And my passion for that made that goal inevitable. And when you have enough passion to make a goal inevitable, you can make a lot of mistakes because you'll never give up.
Mhm.
Right. But people who don't have a goal that is inevitable, they start making mistakes. They start thinking, well, maybe I can't do this. Right. Maybe I'm 60 and A classes out of reach. But that's what I want to tell people is that if your goal is inevitable, every mistake you make is going to bring you one step closer, as long as it's a new mistake. Right. The ones that don't get you there are the old mistakes.
Yeah.
Now, I have absolutely understood that mental management is simpler to apply to IDPA than it is to USPSA. Has that been your experience?
Yeah. A great illustration of that is, and this was before mental management for me, obviously, but I was at must have been 2018 IDPA Worlds, and I had the good fortune to be super squatted, not because I deserved the super squad, but because I asked for a favor from somebody. And so I got to shoot with the Wilson combat team, right? Which in IDPA parlance, especially at the time, was super squad. And that included Robbie, obviously he's Team Springfield, but Rob and Mike and a bunch of other guys on that team that were really good. There's a guy named Glenn Shelby. Nobody's ever heard of him because he doesn't shoot that much. That guy can shoot a 1911 better than Rob. I'm sorry, but he shoots a 1911 better than Rob. He just doesn't compete very much. The guy is insane. Anyway, but I remember eavesdropping on Rob and Mike, kind of laughing, and before the first stage, and just talking and saying, all right, just walk around, shoot zeros. Like the only thing that you have to do in IDPA is shoot zeros. That's it. That's the only thing.
I know. And what's so funny is anytime people talk about Rob Latham, I always say, well, let's look at his strategy, right? Let's just examine what he does. Because you can't learn a lot by watching his videos because he's not a caricature of technique the way Todd Jarrett is.
You can his old stuff. Go back and look at his 80s and early 90s stuff. There's some good stuff there.
Well, that means Jay Beal's got to go find a VCR.
I know,
that's just not going to, he's going to have to Google a VCR. He's going to have to go to a pawn shop. He's going to have to it's just not going to work for this younger generation. But I always say, let's look at his strategy. Always moving, always shooting, never missing. That's a pretty good strategy. And I don't know what his understanding, obviously he's got a phenomenal self-image, right? He is the poster child for, I will win this match. And then when we believe that, and obviously everybody can't do that, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but because I'm sure there's matches you go to that you know you're going to win, right? You're never going to overtry at those matches, never, because you don't need to, and it's not even a temptation. The problem occurs when we go to a match that we don't think we can win. I'm sure I told you the story about when Robbie Latham zeroed the dark house stage. Did I ever tell you that one?
No.
So one year at Nationals, Surefire sponsored this dark house stage. And you go into this shoot house and they turn out the lights. They do give you a lighted walkthrough. And then they turn out the lights and hand you a flashlight and say, load and make ready. So you got to shoot the whole thing in the dark with a flashlight. And the rumor was that he dropped his light and dropped his mag. Whatever happened, he zeroed the stage. Okay. And I had a Super 8 camcorder, and I'm compiling my very first footage for AndersonShooting.com. Right. And I find Robbie, and I was dumb enough to walk up to him and go, hey, Rob, I heard you had some trouble in the shoot house. And you could tell that if I wasn't holding a camera, it would have gone differently, but he was respectful enough to answer my question. He dodged it, which was smart, and then he went on to win every single stage and win nationals that year.
Yeah.
That is the power of self-image. This mistake cannot take this match away from me because this is my match.
Yeah.
Right. And that's So we'll talk about that more in a minute. Now, well, that brings us to our next point. So the first thing we teach people to do is learn to produce what we call a winning performance. Okay. Now you're pretty type A. You're not like, you don't like peg the meter type A, but you're up there. Okay. Most type A people do not like the idea of a winning performance that's not an outright victory.
Yep.
Okay. But for self-image, I think that's the first step. Because when you believe that you can go out and do what most people call shoot your game, right? If you go out and shoot like Ben and you have no regrets, you're not super bothered by a second or third place finish. Most people aren't. However, if you go out and make a bunch of mental mistakes and come in 10th or 11th, that's when you get frustrated, right? So have you, and you please don't give me the answer you think I want, but have you learned to separate a winning performance from outright victory?
Well, that's a struggle every time. This last weekend, there's a couple of young shooters here that they're super, they look like Jay, right? They just run around like these little spider monkeys. They're so quick on their feet. And I watch those guys and I go, oh man, those guys are really good. Like, I better turn it up. But I don't have to turn so my challenge is just to, and I'm tall and I cover ground with what looks like lazy steps sometimes. And when I do that, and when I stick to my game, when I stick to how I shoot, I win, right? Or I at least have a winning performance. Now, if they come out and they hook up on all 7 stages and they beat me for that weekend, like, good for them, awesome work. But yeah, it's still a struggle, but I know that if I shoot my game, I'm going to have the best opportunity to be in a winning position.
Doesn't
mean I'll win, but I'll put myself in position.
That's a great definition for type A winning performance, right? Yep. Type A is, as I've told people numerous times, has a blessing and a curse. The blessing is if they have a singular objective, they don't know how to fail. And if they have multiple objectives, which is the curse, they tend to struggle. So because type A won't know which one's important. But if you go out and say, hey, I'm going to shoot my game, I'm going to have a winning performance, let the chips fall with MA, that's a phenomenal attitude. Because then you can go back to training and learn to make your winning performance the winning performance. But wasn't it frustrating to practice and practice and practice and not be able to produce a winning performance?
Yeah. And it goes back to over trying. And when one of my focus phrases in the past was, you are fast enough. Like, I didn't have to try to be fast. You are fast enough, right? Just shoot. And so my goal is just to shoot, right? And to let the shooting take care of itself. But it's still something that I work on, finding a focus phrase or something to just narrow my mind to, so that I have that singular focus.
So that should be found in your journal.
Yeah, and right now, and it's funny because Jay is kind of working some of the same stuff. Right now, it is absolutely dropping as much tension as I can. And how do I bring that in? But just dropping tension and finding alphas. So mine right now is finding alphas, but a big part of it is dropping tension.
And it's interesting because different words mean different things to different people.
Yeah.
Sometimes when people say hunting alphas, it causes them to get into bullseye mode. Right. And so what that means is you're going to shoot alphas, and you may occasionally get a close Charlie, and that's okay in USPSA sometimes. And that'll bring us to my next question here in a minute. But as I'm sure you've learned, you surrendering to one objective or one idea is far more important than what you choose.
Absolutely.
Did I ever tell you about the blueberry muffin in Alaska?
No.
I got a really good friend in Alaska. You'd love him. Super, super smart guy. He's a numbers guy, but he tends to overthink because he's so smart. Really smart people like things that are complicated because that's their job, is doing things that are complicated. Right. So I said, buddy, I want you to pick one thing to think about. What's something that makes you really happy? He goes, well, I love blueberry muffins. I said, okay, next time you load and make ready, you know the stage plan, you know what you're going to do. I want you to think about a blueberry muffin. And he goes, what are you talking about? I said, let's just try it. He goes and has a great stage. He unloads and shows clear, winks at me and goes, blueberry muffin, baby. Now, the only problem with something like that is that may not be as effective under extreme pressure, right? If he goes to World Shoot Stage 1 and thinks blueberry muffin, his conscious mind might go, are you out of your mind? This is World Shoot Stage 1 and you're thinking about a muffin. But if he fully surrendered to it and was able to clear his mind, it would work. But we need to find something, because remember, pressure can arrive or intensify very unexpectedly, like your basketball tryout. I don't know when that pressure started, but it may have been more pressure than you were expecting.
Oh yeah.
Right. All right. So talk to me a little bit. I have been working with more and more IDPA guys who are shooting USPSA for fun. And I encourage them to establish a primary. We learn that mental management. Make sure you have a primary. If you're going to do some other stuff, that's okay. But it would be difficult for an intermediate shooter to excel at both sports at the same time. So do you have kind of a mental switch you flip where the zeros and the rules become easy for you to engage, or is it still difficult for you to go back and forth?
Yeah, I flipped it. And I actually was thinking about this earlier. I knew we were going to talk about IDPA, USPSA, kind of that switch. And it really is, you can dry fire this. You can dry fire the mental component of this. You can think about the changes in how the rules are, and a lot of IDPA stages, and I'm going to say, unfortunately, I'm seeing more and more that aren't this way, but a lot of IDPA stages are a prescribed course of fire. There aren't many options. It's just who can execute the best, right? And I really love the stages that are getting away from that and are giving you options, whether it's laterally or whatever. But a lot of them are still prescribed. And so you can visualize the rules differences, because the target part, the shooting part, pulling the trigger, getting into position and out of position, and fault lines are pretty dang similar these days. And so all of the actual shooty bits are really similar. There's a couple of changes in how you engage targets. So you dry fire it. There's no reason you can't dry fire that switch back and forth. And so I do. That's just an easy way to do it. And if you have enough repetitions of it, it's automatic. Now,
Yeah, I would treat so if there's one that is super prescribed, I would treat that as an advantage and say, hey, I can skip the analyze.
Yeah, less thinking. Yeah.
Maybe skip the strategize. I can go straight to memorize.
Yeah.
And on a 5-minute walkthrough, you just saved at least 2 minutes of having to make a decision. So I would encourage you to treat that as an advantage instead of a disadvantage. I know that when we shoot USPSA and we're used to going all hot rod, you sometimes feel constrained by those rules, but I would encourage you to see that as an advantage.
There's it's just a slight change in how you engage targets. It's not that hard.
Yeah, not a big deal. And I'm not going to ask you which of the sports is your favorite, because I'm not going to put you on the spot like that. But I do want to bring up a point. You said in the beginning you were skeptical of the journal, and you and I have that in common, right? That was the part of it that I was like, oh, he says we got to do this. This seems silly. I'm a 45 at the time. I was 45 years old. What am I going to do with a diary? But then, like everything else, I'm not going to say skeptical, but wasn't accustomed to. I tried it. I just did it. So Lanny says it's important. I'm going to try it. And I can still remember every word I've ever written in my journal about shooting, right? I do a journal entry every time I go to the range, which is not that often. But my memories of what I've done on the range recently are so vivid and clear because I wrote them down. And if anybody has a confidence problem, so confidence is at least 30% of success. And all we have to do to increase our success is look at the past success that we've had and predict future success. But the problem is many shooters don't see success when they look back. Was that something you ever struggled with? Because, right, so type A tends to see perfection or failure. Did you have trouble finding success to predict future success?
Yeah, I did. Well, I think, and especially when you look now at, it's crazy how many Instagram posts glorify the crap that they did on their most recent match, right? I'm like, dude, why are you talking about this stuff? And that's absolutely because of the journals. Like I've got my stack of journals here, Steve, right? Like here's my stack of journals that I've been working on for the last couple of years. And it's absolutely changed how I approach it, how I shoot, how I mentally, rehearse and review. And there's things I need to work on, obviously, but I look at those as needs improvement, as opportunities. Definitely was a little bit tricky to come into, but I think if you don't, it's not a diary, right? A diary is, Billy's so cute, right? For a 16-year-old. A journal is a record of your best shooting. It's a record of what has gone well and occasionally what needs work, but it's a record of everything great in your shooting career.
Yeah,
right? This is your mom's scrapbook of all of your highlights, right?
yeah,
That's
that's
all it
great.
is.
This is your trophy wall in words
Yeah.
you can understand. So
Yeah.
what I've begun doing when we get to the journal part is I say, all right, Mr. Skeptic, I can see it in your eyes. For $9.99, would you buy a book about your absolute best shooting and how to duplicate it? Now, oh, I'd buy that book 100 times. Well, you can't, but you can write it.
Yeah.
You can write a book about your best shooting. My favorite Lanny Basham quote is, consistency is caused by the quality of your thoughts and your ability to duplicate them. So if we know what's happening when it's working, even if it's, I was very surprised when we went to lunch with Lanny last time. You're welcome for that, by the way. Not many people, right? If I can get you lunch with Lanny, I can get you practice with JJ. I could probably make that happen. He said
JJ would be glad to practice with me if we can find a hole in our own schedules. It's just that dude travels 300 days out of the year. He's crazy.
I've heard his classes are booked like 3 years in advance, which I'm kind of
it's insane how much he travels. Yeah.
But Lanny said he's okay with some variations on mental management as long as they work. Remember him saying that? Yep. Remember how surprised I was to hear that? I was like, did you just say what I thought you said? Thought that was interesting. Now, what is your favorite part of mental management? Which was the big aha moment for you?
I think the reload is really powerful.
Yeah.
It's just it helps you avoid the dumpster fire replays, and it replaces it with awesome. Like, so powerful.
That's Jay Beal's favorite part too. And for most people, it's the only part they don't know because we don't talk about it on the podcast. And thank you for not going into too much detail on it because we can't give it away. You probably knew that.
You can't give it away. No.
But so every time somebody has gone through mental management and they're still struggling, we find that they're only reloading the bad stages, which can actually be a negative imprint, right? So if they have a needs work stage and now I got to go do my reload because I screwed it up. Well, now we have a potential negative imprint. Mark Sue made that mistake in Oregon. And then, but if you reloading the great ones might be more important than reloading the needs work. Because what you're doing is you're imprinting to your self-image, I know how to do this correctly and I can do this correctly. Now, when you leave it, because you're so type A, does your self-image believe you did it right, or does it believe you can do it right?
I did it. Like, who else did it? That was me.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Because I feel that there's some type A that might, well, of course, you're smart enough not to do this, but if they do that and they follow it up with, this isn't real because I screwed it up, then the final imprint would be negative, right? Because the final imprint is a fact in the short term.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about, and we're going to be talking with Gaz and Jay about this tomorrow, is comparing dry fire and live fire. That is one of the most common questions I get. People say, hey, I've been dry firing, I'm doing all this. When I get to the range, I'm not able to put it together in the same amount of time. And number one, of course not, because recoil, right? And you used to use a cool fire for a little while, didn't you?
I used to cool fire for a while. I don't have one for the Berettas, although I just talked to those guys a couple of days ago. The biggest benefit to the cool fire that I see is it forces cycle time into your dry fire, right? You can't fake the cycle time. Right. And so when you are, when you're 2 on in a transition, you can't just rip it across without those cycled sight pictures. That's the most valuable part of cool fire for me.
Even though it's not 100% realistic, there is a disturbance on the sights you have to recover from.
Right, you have to recover, and in the gun cycles, you have to let it come back.
Yeah. So how do you? So let's say you're doing something in dry fire and you go to the range. How do you evaluate success when comparing a dry fire time versus a live fire time?
A lot of it is comparison to known performance, right? If there's a drill, if there's a class fire, there's a common drill, a bill drill or whatever, what good times are for that. Hey, Jay's a great repository of unachievable times in live fire, right? But so sometimes it's a known factor. If it's not a known factor, then really I'm focusing on the manipulation. Like if I can do a sub-second reload in dry fire, I can do a sub-second reload in live fire. Why not? Like the stuff that is not shooting related, that is not, noise related, you can absolutely replicate in live fire. And so I just look at it as an opportunity to see more about what's going on and to validate the manipulation that I'm doing in dry fire.
Yeah, and I don't think the direct comparison is all that relevant as long as they're both improving.
Right.
The other thing that I want
one more thing.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
What I also do is if I'm working on something in dry fire, and then I get to the range and I nail it, I'm like, yes, like all of that work, and I just nailed it. And I'm not trying to hit a 2-second, I can't think of the drill. Your 6 reload 6. I'm not trying to hit 2 seconds on that or 3, because I can dry fire it in 2.7 or 2.9. I'm not trying to do that in live fire. It's just not achievable. But if I get out there and I nail it, then I'm like, that's where all of that dry fire work has paid off, is because I just nailed my transitions. I just nailed that reload, and I can do this in live fire.
Yeah. And I had a conversation with an IDPA guy yesterday who's dry firing the 5x5 classifier.
Yep.
And what I told him is, in dry fire, the only thing you don't get to keep are the splits. You get to keep everything else. You get to keep the draw, you get to keep the reload, you get to keep the transitions, you get to keep the sight pictures. So we had him reverse engineer the 5x5 classifier with his known splits, right? Estimated realistic splits, and then figure out what time is left for the draw. And curiously, my very next call had a guy working on the exact same thing, and he discovered that he could have, as long as his draw, I think these are round numbers, so forgive me if they're not correct, but he discovered that if his draw was in the 1-3 range, his splits could be 30s.
Yeah. People think in order to do something fast, you have to run 16s or 18s. Dude, I'm telling you, 18s, 20s, 22s are acceptable for nearly every single shot in either sport. And 30s and 35s, like you can get away with a ton. And that is so much time to get it right. And, talk about draw on IDPA real quick. People are like, oh, there's the vest and everything. It's not a race holster. And I can do my IDPA draw maybe a 10 slower than my race holster. And I'm sweeping a vest and getting to a high holster. It just takes repetition. Like people will do a 1.5 or a 1.8 on an IDPA draw because they gotta swing it out of the way like they're Phantom of the Opera or some shit. It's like, just get there. It doesn't have to be slow.
Yeah. And because I'm wearing a KISS t-shirt today, that brings our KISS connection. Paul Stanley did play the Phantom of the Opera on numbers of occasions, just to bring the KISS. Paul Stanley, Star Child, they're right there, Phantom of the Opera.
Okay.
All right. So on that note specifically, whenever I work with people in IDPA, they worry too much about the vest and not enough about the gun.
Yeah.
And the gun is just, the vest is just an obstacle to get to the gun. So yeah, we're going to be talking to Jay tomorrow about dry fire. Did you see his Instagram this morning?
Where is it, the one where he's introducing tension on purpose?
Well, so the video is surrender draws with a amg-lab.com Anderson timers. Yeah. Click. There was like a 43 first shot in there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if these guys are joking or not, but some guy gets in there and says, well, you're not going to get a beep in a gunfight. And my response to that is, he's going to be reacting to something.
Yeah, he doesn't need one. Like with a 43 first in a gunfight, that other dude did the Phantom of the Opera draw. Like he swept his garment out of the way, Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me of the meme where somebody's getting ready to rob Jerry Michalak and he pulls out a timer and goes, try me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great to go mug Jerry Michalak and have him pull one of those old blue timers out and hang on a minute? All right. So Ben, what are your goals for the future?
For the future, I want to continue to improve. Obviously, that's why I'm doing this thing, to find incremental improvements. I would like to win an IDPA national championship in karaoke, and I think that I have the potential this year to give myself a winning performance. Right? I don't know what everybody else is going to do, but I believe that I have that ability this year.
Sure.
I'd like to perform well enough to be invited to Super Squad at USPSA, CO, or Limited Optic Nationals, depending on, I'm probably going to switch over to LO later this year. I'd like to be at the same level in USPSA, right? I want to be top 5% of the shooters in USPSA.
That's awesome, dude. Now, you know this, but I want to remind you, all you have to do is take everything the sport requires and compare your ability to do that with somebody you need to beat.
Right.
Right. So for example, in IDPA, if we look at the two different kinds of reloads, if we look at hard lanes, if we look at your ability to shoot zeros, right? Are you the best in the country at all of those things?
Right.
When you are, that's when you'll win.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people don't know, because everybody knows, okay, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses. Well, what if there wasn't anything in the weakness column? What if they were all strengths?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a particular weakness on the IDPA side of things. We've talked a little bit about it before, but the Saul Kirsch spreadsheet of stack ranking your skills, and something has to be the weakest of your skills. But I'm not scared of any skill in IDPA or USPSA for that matter, but I'm not scared of any skill in IDPA. There are probably a couple that somebody can do better than me, but on average, I'm really good at all of them. Right.
Yeah. And the other interesting thing about that spreadsheet is, if we're going to have a week, let's make sure it's prone. Let's make sure that it's the least. And then a true world champion would put prone at the very top. May see it, may not. But we know Eric Gefeld doesn't care about going prone.
The other thing, the opposite of that, and I think people struggle with this, the opposite of that is, not only do you need to make the weakest something like prone, but you need to make sure that you have a 10. Like, everything is based off of your high score, which is a 10. You're like, well, I'm not really a 10. You can't do that. You have a 10 in your skill set. What is your best skill? It's a 10. Congratulations. Like, take the credit for that 10 and then base the rest of your shooting off of it. Right. So give yourself the 10, man. Like, take it.
Yeah. Mine would be hoser stages.
Right.
You could sign me up for the world shoot tomorrow, and if the first stage was a hoser stage, I would say, put me in first. I don't care if I'm rusty. I am ready to go.
Right.
But if it had a mover I'd never shot before, I'd be like, yeah, my last name's Anderson, starts with a Z. Speaking of movers, how do you train or approach movers you've never seen before? What's your strategy?
I figure if I've never seen it before, probably everybody else has never seen it before too. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be similar to something I have seen, similar enough where I can shoot it. And the only ones that really are a challenge are the holy monkey kind of things, where it's completely random movement types, right? And luckily, you're not going to see a random mover at a level 3 or 5 or whatever, because you can't. But when you see it at a 1 or a 2 or your local or something, the random stuff, there is going to be a way to shoot it and shoot it effectively. And once you identify it, quit worrying about it. If you're an ambusher, ambush it. If you're a tracker, track it. Just decide how you're going to shoot it and shoot it.
If you listen very closely, maybe cup your ear, you can hear Jason Wood screaming at his radio that the holy monkey is not random and is the same every single time.
No, I think I remember somebody saying about that, where they had to set it off some number of times to prove that it wasn't random. It's random.
All his screaming just got louder. He came all the way from Anchorage. It's not random. It doesn't. But even that one has a trick, right? The second presentation is very lazy. And then the first one's erratic and the third's erratic. But I think but the second one for sure is pretty lazy.
Yeah, the first couple are pretty consistent. But the problem is you can't set it up. you can't set it up with the same weights and the same everything else. And so the longer you get into the cycle, the more random it gets.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So, and from my personal experience, the best progress I ever made on movers, and you took the words right out of my mouth. Once I learned to shoot swingers and I could compare a mover I'd never shot before to a swinger in any way, right? Then I immediately at least began to get a little more confidence on it, right?
Yeah. I think you have to shoot them. Like, spend some time practicing movers. I'll take mine out and I'll practice it, and I'll set up all of the hard stuff, the tiny window on a super fast swinger. You set that up and you figure out what you need to do to shoot it. Like, shoot the things that you can practice. And if you can't practice them live, practice them in dry fire. It's not that hard to fake a dry fire swinger. Set it up and shoot it, set it up and shoot it, set it up and record, observe what you see, because that's all that matters.
And what I want to advise people of, swingers particularly, using a shot up target on the front and a clean target on the back is super, super critical. Number one, it's easier to paste because there's usually a vision barrier in the way. And number two, on shooters, it's not important what you can do or get lucky with. It's important what you can call.
Yeah.
And it isn't good enough, in my opinion, to go down there and find Alpha Charlie and not have any clue how you did it.
Yeah.
Right. But using that shot up target on the front, a clean target on the back, I say, okay, number one, do we have 2 hits? Yes or no? And they're like, well, no, tell me 2 hits, yes or no? Yes, there's 2 hits. But that's the first definition of success. And then once they can do that, we just bring them in until they get better and better and better and better. Like everything.
Let's talk about swingers and IDPA for just a second. Is that all right if we do that?
Yeah, that's why we're here.
So IDPA major matches use a lot of swingers and they use a lot of drop turners. And in my experience, most of the swingers are an out and back. They're not window. They're not super difficult or super tricky. They're an out and back and out and back with a low period of availability for shooting. And if you talk about every IDPA stage is a 1 hit factor, right? Every stage is a 1 hit factor, because outside of that 0, that's 1 second. That's a 1 hit factor, right? So every single stage is a 1 hit factor. And if you approach your shooting like that, then you can make some decisions. And so, and again, on average, your exposures are at least a 1 second cycle. And so if you're standing there for 2 exposures and maybe a 3rd exposure, because you're not sure what your hits are, you just cost yourself 3, 4, 5 seconds of not knowing what your hits were. So shot calling, to go to your point, is critical on swingers, because if you can get 2 shots on a single pass, even if it's 2 ones, right? And you know that it's 2 ones, like, move on, because waiting around and maybe improving one of those ones is not worth the 1.5 second exposure, because every IDPA stage is 1 hit factor. So it's different. It's different math game in USPSA, but for IDPA, get to where you can call those shots. Know that you've got 0s or 1s. Obviously, you have to make up 3s and 5s, but 0s or 1s are 90% of the time they're acceptable in 1 pass, and move on. And know that you're going to do that, and don't camp at the stinking swinger. Will cut a ton of time off of those stages that have swingers, which in the IDPA majors is a significant amount of stages.
That's a lot. Yeah. That's really smart. I never thought about IDPA being a 1 hit factor. I'm going to have to, math's not my strong, so I'm going to have to wrap my head around that. So basically,
what it means is every Charlie, you have a full second to turn it into an alpha. Every single one of them.
Before it hurts you. Yeah. That's interesting. And center the available target area with non-threats, maybe, sometimes, not always, depends on the risk.
Depends on the risk. Yeah. Depends on the risk and the confidence and the distance. There was a headshot covered by not a non-threat, but a hard cover, so still a 5 second penalty. There was a headshot at 20 some yards a couple years ago, where you could choose to activate it and try to shoot it while the hard cover was down, or you could skip the activator or skip something and come back and shoot it a headshot only. And that's one where maybe you want to take a little bit of time, not go for center of available, because it's only a 4-inch square anyway. But center of available just doesn't math out like it does for USPSA, because everything is a 1 hit factor.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's perfectly understandable. But what's a non-threat? 5?
A non-threat is 5, but it's not 15 points like a USPSA target, right? Or Mike non-threat is not 15.
Right,
Well, 25 if you count the points you didn't get, right? So
right. That's good. Well, Ben, do you have anything else to add before we get going?
Gosh, Steve, I appreciate your help and your time, and I enjoy doing this. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah, and I just want to add, if your 80-year-old mother gets a virus, do not call Ben Hart.
Do not call me. You can call me. My rates are $300 an hour.
Yeah, $300 an hour. That's right. Okay. My mom would have paid that to get out front of that spoofing, phishing or whatever it was. All right. Once again, we're here with Ben Hart. I do want to thank my sponsors very quickly. I'll let you do the same. We are a proud service of Walther Firearms, who is superior to Beretta in every way. Well, the one thing that is superior is the 30-day money-back guarantee, right? That's a pretty sweet deal.
That's a good deal, yeah.
And then, of course, Targets USA, CR Speed, AMG Labs, Hunters HD Gold, OutdoorDynamics.net, and Shooting Sports Innovations. So, and obviously Walther. And who would you like to thank besides Beretta for their continued support of your career?
Gosh, I'm super lucky, Steve. I was actually going through this list because we had to put it in for new jerseys for the year. Obviously, Beretta makes my stuff. Tony System makes awesome components, especially for the Berettas, but for all sorts of guns. And they have supported me since the beginning. Mark 7, the reloading guys, I love my machine. Like, I'm ashamed about how much I love playing with that thing. And it allows me to shoot, what I'm hoping to be 20, 25,000 rounds before CO Nats out here. Precision Holsters is a great guy and really loves what he does and makes great holster gear for me. Lock Grips has done some really cool stuff, and they're prototyping some stuff for me right now. Those guys, they love shooting sports. I know you've probably got their brass thing on your PDP, but those guys are just awesome. They love shooting sports. Ton of support from those guys. And there's a local guy here named Greg, and he started a supplement company called Make Ready Nutrition, and he really is pushing this stuff. And it's great, like the hydration stuff, the pre-workout stuff. So I'm really happy to support Greg because he's doing some great shooting sport specific work. And then my buddy Fabio, who owns a training company, My Own Defender. Fabio.
Oh, he's such a great
guy. Fabio is a great guy and a really good teacher. I got to take his class a couple of weeks ago, and it shouldn't have, but it surprised me how good of an instructor he was.
Once you get past the accent, of course.
Right.
Probably the only professional trumpet player who's also a highly accomplished. I can't think of another one. It feels so good to talk about Fabio.
It feels so good.
Feels so good. All right, Ben, thanks again for your time. As always, it's been wonderful talking to you. I think we got all the sponsors out of the way, so all we got to do now is the catchy catchphrase. Until we meet again, be like me, be like Ben, and
get to work.
Get to work.